With the OnePlus 5, we now have another dual camera in the Android space, but we wanted to put it up against another dual camera that does things a little bit differently. It's Joshua Vergara, what's going on everybody, and this is the OnePlus 5 versus the LG G6 in this battle between Zoom and Wide. Before we get to all of that, however, let's go ahead and briefly go through all of the other bases and talk about the specifications. The OnePlus 5 has a slightly different philosophy when it comes to the flagship game, and you can see it plainly in its design and in its display. The OnePlus 5 is a sleek metal phone that is contrary to a lot of the glass-on-glass designs that we see from other phones like the LG G6. However, there are some defining traits in the design, especially for the G6, which puts the power button on the back with its integrated fingerprint reader. The fingerprint reader on the OnePlus 5 is up front in the capacitive array, and then in terms of its input, there is the alert slider which makes a return here. But overall handling is about the same between these two phones, and you're not really going to have too many problems with either of them really slipping about too much. However, there is a little bit more screen on the LG G6 because of its new 18:9 aspect ratio. You can fit more screen on this device because it's a little bit more narrow, and LG has managed to make the screen go pretty close to the very edges of the front. Compare that to the OnePlus 5, which has 1080p resolution in its screen, which is still okay for a lot of users out there. However, it does still stick to the 16:9 aspect ratio, which looks a little bit more conventional when you put it up against the likes of the S8 and the G6 in this case. Slight controversies aside, the AMOLED display of the OnePlus 5 performs very well, and it does put out some more saturated colors when compared to the LG G6. However, the IPS display of the G6 is still a wonderful performer. Now, while the G6 will have an always-on display that kind of mimics the secondary display that you would see on the V20, the OnePlus 5 does have a couple of extra features under its sleeve. There's a less egregious nightlight blue filter, but the main feature that we like here is the reading mode, which monochromes the entire display so that the OnePlus 5 works a little bit like a secondary Kindle. If you're reading books on your phone or going through different websites like AndroidAuthority.com, it'll look better and easier on the eyes. The 5 actually surpasses the LG G6 on the spec sheet, sporting the Snapdragon 835 over the 821, 6GB of RAM over the 4, and even more internal storage in the base models. There's no denying that the performance between these two phones is going to be top-notch, but we still have to tip the hat to OnePlus for keeping their phone's internals as high as possible for the spec-hungry people out there. In terms of performance, however, between these two phones, you shouldn't really have any issues at all. When it comes to extras, however, the LG G6 is a bit of a mixed bag. While there are features like a dedicated DAC or wireless charging involved, they're only available in particular markets. OnePlus, on the other hand, keeps the extras to a general minimum with the exception of the alert slider, which we already mentioned. And pretty much every connection type that users might need is available here, including NFC for the OnePlus 5. Battery performance somewhat favors the OnePlus 5, if only because its screen is a little bit smaller and has lower resolution. However, the LG G6 doesn't fall too far behind. After all, both of these phones have the same capacity in their battery units. Android Nougat is found on both of these phones in their own respective flavors, and in the case of LG, the extras have been scaled back in recent iterations. Q-Slide is still available if somewhat hidden, and to make life easier, customizable soft keys make it so that you don't have to reach to the top in order to bring down the notification slider. OnePlus, on the other hand, has still brought a level of customization to Oxygen OS. The capacitive array can be deactivated for soft keys, or they can be customized for specific functions, while more input methods like drawing gestures on the standby screen make it easier to open some of your most used applications. The OnePlus 5 is also one of the only phones out there to support a dark mode, and we also enjoy the shelf, which provides a place to safely put away some widgets so that they don't take up room on the main home screens. So now we can talk about the cameras, and for the most part we're dealing with two high-powered shooters here. The front-facing cameras, however, have a clear difference as the OnePlus 5 has a 13-megapixel front-facing shooter compared to the 5-megapixel shooter of the LG G6. The front-facing camera of the OnePlus 5 has a clear advantage over the LG G6 as it sports 13 megapixels, much higher than the 5 megapixels of the LG G6. However, the G6 does have this ability to crop in the sensor. This is the original wide-angle version of the front-facing sensor that you can then crop in a little bit so that you can use one or the other in order to get more people into your selfie. The interfaces also show off a little bit of a difference in philosophy. The longer screen allows for more room so that on the side there is a really sleek interface for checking the most recent pictures and videos when you're inside of the camera app. The difference in the OnePlus 5 is that the OnePlus camera is a little bit simpler, but you can go into the Pro mode and you'll get tools like even a histogram to be able to find out exactly how your shot's going to turn out. The LG G6 photos tended to come in a little bit more overexposed, and on top of that, its color processing was a little bit more dialed back. The HDR on the OnePlus 5 resulted in contrasty photos and also higher bumps up in saturation. So that means that the OnePlus 5 camera is probably going to end up providing the more crowd-pleasing photos, whereas the LG G6 is the more accurate one depicting the scene. The same basically goes for video as well, as you can record 4K videos on either of these cameras. So even if the experience is going to be pretty top-notch no matter which one you pick, we can talk about the extra now, zoom versus wide. With the OnePlus 5 you get a zoom lens that allows for 2x optical zoom, and then you can go beyond that with slight dips in quality. I took both of these cameras out to San Diego Comic-Con and I found that the OnePlus 5 was a little bit more useful for that kind of situation. After all, I was in a lot of different crowds, and if I wanted to actually get a picture of the subject that we were all crowding around, the zoom actually helped with that. Like in this picture, where I got a paparazzi-style shot of Tom Welling, former star of Smallville. Or in this case, outside of Comic-Con, where I was part of a big group that was taking pictures of these amazing Overwatch Mercy cosplayers. There's another reason why the zoom is helpful on the OnePlus 5 as well, a portrait mode that uses software processing along with the tighter focal length in order to create a nice looking portrait of your subject. You can put anyone or anything into the frame and it will try to draw a line around the subject and then add a bokeh effect to everything in the background. The problem with the portrait mode is that it's a bit hit or miss. The lines have to be very defined on the subject, or else you're going to get certain parts of the photo that are still in focus as the software wasn't able to really define the subject. When it works, it's a beautiful photo, but when it doesn't work, you get kind of uneven photos. And if you don't have well-lit situations, you won't be able to use the portrait mode in low light. So now we have the wide-angle lens of the G6. It makes perfect sense that you would have zoom when you just need to get right into the subject, but when it comes to wide-angle shots, you're trying to share even more of the scene and thus more of your experience. Users would never have to worry about getting everybody into the frame, or in some cases, anything in the frame, when it's so wide that you'll be able to get a nice dramatic shot of the scene. Even the most mundane of photos can be made more appealing when there is plenty more to share outside of just the subject. And as it stands right now, LG is the only company that is making a wide-angle lens that is standard on all of their flagship phones. Ultimately, it matters what is more practical to you. The zoom lens is going to make more sense for people who are typically too far away from their subjects, and if you want to use the portrait mode, then it's going to do a good job as long as it works perfectly. The wide-angle lens is probably a little bit more fun to use, and it's going to get everything into the shot in a dramatic fashion. Maybe you want to focus, quite literally, on very specific things, using a zoom lens or portrait mode, and that's the perfect way of describing the OnePlus 5. With its honed-in specifications, you don't really get too many extras, but you get a top-notch experience still. Or you want to get everything you possibly can into the frame, and that's a great way of describing the LG G6. With its wide-angle lens, great specifications, 18:9 aspect ratio with bezel-less almost display, and pretty much everything you could ask for in an LG device, well, you get that with the G6. So that might be the best way of describing this comparison. Let us know which one you would prefer, zoom or wide, or if you would prefer the OnePlus 5 or the LG G6. Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and follow us, Android Authority, all over the interwebs. Remember to head on over to AndroidAuthority.com for even more, because we are your source for all things Android.